I discovered alcohol, that first sip showed me something that I'd never felt before. And that was that feeling, and this is a common metaphor, the feeling of taking off a tight shoe. That for the first time, you feel that relief, that feeling of letting your guard down and relaxing for the first time. Hello there. I'm going to come clean today for the first time about my journey with alcohol. And I have no structure here. I'm just going to tell you exactly what I've been holding back, sharing for my entire life. Out of shame. Alcohol for me was the answer to so many of my struggles and problems for so long, but it was also the reason for so many struggles and problems for so long. We live in a world, clearly, that alcohol is prolific as a social lubricant and coping mechanism. And we know that it's also a poison. It's ethanol. It's a poison. So it's this we're in a weird part of our evolution as humans where we're still consuming something that is essentially toxic to the human body, but is so accepted as normal. And I fell right into that too. I didn't know I was programmed into this societal norm. But you see, some people cannot handle it. And I was one of them. My first drink of alcohol when I was about 16 years old, I was underage, and I went to some teenage birthday party at a hall where the parents must have had a fair bit of money, and they hired this massive hall and cartons and cartons and cartons of alcohol. And my boyfriend at the time and I started to drink these cans, or these bottles, I think they were, of VB, which is, in my opinion, a pretty gross beer here in Australia. Now, I had never had alcohol before. I was brought up in a very protected, sheltered life because we were religious and it was strict. My upbringing was quite strict around this. We tried to be virtuous in our belief system. And so I was highly disciplined around that and sheltered from that part of the world. I wasn't really even someone who was allowed to socialize with worldly people who drank. And so this was unfamiliar to me. And when I was 16, I was exposed to a whole world. I'd never been to parties with alcohol before. And the first sip it was yuck. The taste of alcohol was just gross to me, and I couldn't understand what all this fuss had been about. And I kept drinking because I was trying to find out what everyone was drinking this for. And very, very quickly, and I've never really had this reaction since, my entire lips went numb. I couldn't even feel them. My tongue went numb. And I got really, really drunk. And I remember making out with my boyfriend at the time. We were so drunk. We were so naive. We took our bottles out onto the street, and because, we were just teenagers, we had no experience or opportunity to, make out with each other. And we went out and we did that on the side of the street with a cop car drove past. And of course, we were violating a drinking in public law, and just completely naive children, really. And, the two cops came and interrupted our little session together and told us we had to tip our alcohol out. And that was my first experience drinking, coming from a very sheltered upbringing to getting really drunk and apprehended by the police. Now, for about a year and a half after that, I still didn't drink any more alcohol. I actually felt really embarrassed about that experience, as you might imagine. I remember my boyfriend's parents dropping me home, and I was so busting to pee that I jumped out of the car, didn't even say goodbye. I'd never had that experience either. And so I was mortified by that, and it gave me a bad taste about alcohol. And for a year and a half, until I was 18, I did not drink. And see, I finished high school at 16 years old. So because I skipped a year when I moved from down in Victoria up to Queensland. And I did my entire first year of university underage, 17. And so I wasn't part of that scene either. I wasn't really exposed to that scene. I had high school friends, but they had all moved to a different city, to Brisbane, and I was on the Sunshine Coast. So I kind of was still in a way sheltered from that whole experience. Now, I won't talk about cigarettes because that's something that I did get into when I was 17, trying to fit in with this girl I thought was really cool, and I wanted to be like her, and I wanted to be her friend, and I did what she did. I copied her and I started smoking. Anyway, the point of this conversation is alcohol. And so it wasn't until I dropped out of my first year of uni and I went, because I had no direction in my life. I studied arts, then I changed it to business arts, then I changed it to graphic design, and then I just went, you know what, I have no idea what I'm doing, and this is expensive. And so I dropped out and I got a job in hospitality at Sizzler, which is a well-known buffet restaurant, all you can eat. Don't really think it's around anymore. And in this environment, the hospitality environment, I learned to party. And partying I did. I did it extreme. The Hermetic principle, the law of rhythm, the principle of rhythm. When we have been doing one thing extreme, for me that was extreme sheltered and protection from the world. And I went and did the whole pendulum swing in the extreme opposite direction of, I've got to go out into the world, I've got to experience it, I've got to do it all now. And I did it really hard. Now, I was a really proactive, hardworking hospitality worker, and I had a lot of pride in my work. I enjoyed it. I loved to create order and efficiency in my work, in my jobs. And my boss, my supervisor, started to notice my performance was slipping because I was going out partying every single Friday night and Saturday night at age 18. And the thing is, let me just describe this experience, this feeling. So growing up, I had been programmed into having very tight control measures to feel safe in my environment. I had learned that I had to do, produce, achieve to have any value. And so I pushed myself. I was hard on myself. It was all about achievement and some sort of external success that I had to see, to recognize, to know that I was working hard enough. But of course, this never comes. So I was also at that time ritualistically counting my calories, running every day, and I had started bulimia, which is a whole nother talk. I've done a series on that. I had started to learn that I could control how much food that stayed and processed and digested in my body through bulimia. And that kept me in control. Now, this is all about the theme of control. So my entire life up to this point had been about control and staying in control. When I discovered alcohol, that first sip showed me something that I'd never felt before. And that was that feeling, and this is a common metaphor, the feeling of taking off a tight shoe. That for the first time, you feel that relief, that feeling of letting your guard down and relaxing for the first time. I was free. I was free of the worry of being successful. working hard enough and of being good enough. And that's the big theme here. I had temporary relief from not feeling good enough. And so alcohol became this tool, this medicine for me to try and find that equilibrium between extreme control and letting go completely. And so I used alcohol. But of course, that wasn't creating any kind of equilibrium. That was going from extreme to extreme. And I didn't see it. I did not have any consciousness around this, any of this. I was very unconscious. And what I found was that this was fun that I had never had before. So much fun, because I didn't allow myself to have fun when I was growing up. This was fantastic. And I could talk to people that I was normally a bit timid and shy to talk to. I could say things that I'd been passively holding back. I could do things that really deep down I always wanted to do, like go out and dance freely. And I did all these things when I was drinking, and I loved it. And when you're 18, you're really not aware of consequences yet. I believe science has shown that it's really around the age of 25 where we start to make choices thinking about consequences a little more. Consequences were not in my mind. I was young, I was invincible. I didn't really know where I was heading down this road. It would be really interesting if I'd been able to tell my younger self this. But she needed to learn, and she needed to go this way for whatever reason. It's not relevant right now. The point is, I went down this road and I learned a hell of a lot. And I've been through a hell of a lot because of this experience. Now, the other part of me drinking heavily, and this is the part that I was very ashamed of for so very long, was the promiscuity that would come with drinking. I had been brought up pretty much not even being allowed to talk about the taboo topic of sexuality. And so I was naive about this entire area. I just knew I was feeling things, and I didn't know how to act upon them. But when I drank, I just became that root chakra energy. You know, I just felt the impulse now to just go and express myself sexually. And I did that. And now that didn't take away the shame or the programming I had around this. I had immense shame that began to build within me throughout all these years of drinking, because I was doing things when I was drunk that I would never normally do if I was in control. I would find myself in precarious situations, which, in order for me to move on the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, I would block out completely. Kind of like the way I had blackouts. I'm sure you're aware of blackouts. Blackouts are not when you are acting without conscious awareness at the time, but rather your mind, your brain deletes the memory of it later. And so I have potentially months and months of blackout periods that I don't remember in my life, if you added them up. And this created immense avoidance of being with me, being still, being with my inner child. I didn't even know those concepts then. I didn't know what stillness was, but I certainly couldn't be with myself. I had to be busy. I had to stay distracted from facing this big shadow that was building and building and building. I didn't have a way of putting any of this into words back then. I just knew I hated myself. I hated myself. But I didn't want to admit it because that would be too painful. I didn't have anyone to turn to either. Not that I felt was safe. And this is actually a very common theme for people who struggle with alcohol, is they never developed a safe relationship when they were younger. Their parents didn't provide them with a safe space to express the range of feelings that they feel. Anything that was judged as bad or negative we were told to suppress. And so we learned that it wasn't safe to be around others and express these range of emotions. And so we never had the space with someone to express who we really were. All of that, good or bad. And so this theme was absolutely part of my life. I never had a safe relationship to express all my emotions. I didn't even know I was supposed to express emotions. I was told it was not good. And so when I would get really drunk, some of this stuff would come up. And it was like a Jekyll and Hyde situation. There was this Melise personality that would come out that was angry, so angry, so angry, sometimes in a rage. And this was scary for anyone around me, any loved one, any friend. And the other Melise personality that would come out was deep, deep sadness, despair, absolute despair. So I would turn into this crying heap of hopelessness at other times. It was rare for me to get drunk and stay happy because of all of those suppressed emotions that needed to be seen and heard, that I had denied out of self-hate. And so these demons, if you like, would come out. These parts of me that I had avoided would come out at the worst times when I was drunk. Now, I should also mention that many times, even when I was 18, at the beginning of my drinking experience, I knew that I couldn't handle my alcohol because my social circles would recognize that. I would see the looks that they would give me the next day because I never remember the night before. I would feel the judgment directed at me. I would feel that so thick, but I had no reference point as to why they were projecting that at me. All I knew was that I got some relief from the world of control I lived in, and I had a blackout. And that was such a theme. You know, my Friday nights and Saturday nights were always started with good intentions, have a couple drinks with the girls, but it always ended with me off my face, unable to walk straight, completely blackout. And you can imagine how many friends I lost over time because that's not socially acceptable. But I didn't have any other solution for feeling better. It was indeed an addiction for me because it wasn't entirely about social lubrication or, you know, which is a big part of my experience as well, that anxiety, that social anxiety. It took all that away, yes, but the main motivator for me was relief from control and from being hard on myself. And no one offered me a solution outside of drinking. I didn't know who to ask or where to go. I was deeply ashamed of my own behaviors. I didn't want to face them. So you can see this huge conflict within. I knew something was wrong, really wrong, but I didn't feel safe to try and find a solution. So this went on for many, many years. I would go through periods of not drinking. I would go through periods of, I'm going to have one drink, just 2 drinks. I'm going to have just 2 drinks. I could not ever stop at 2 drinks. It's like opening a can of worms. It's just, it comes out. I can't stop. And what I've found is that the solution had to be no drinking. I tried for so long to just moderate my drinking. Oh, there's so much material out there in the self-development industry around alcohol. Just moderate your drinking. No, that's why they have AA, because it's a different mechanism. It's a different impulse to drink than someone who's drinking it for a social lubrication. It's a different impulse. It's a different motivator for someone like that, like me, who went through this experience and used it. It was a medicine. It wasn't a social lubricant. It was a medicine, albeit a very, very nasty medicine that had terrible side effects. I had many experiences. I could tell you many experiences of drinking and getting into embarrassing and shameful situations. Probably would rather not share those right now. I still feel a little embarrassed about those, and maybe that's more work I need to do there. Suffice to say, think of that friend growing up who drank too much. That was me. And for a long time, because I already had self-esteem issues, that became my identity as well. And so that increased my self-hate. I identified myself as the shameful girl who couldn't hold her alcohol, who did embarrassing things. And that persona became an embodiment. Obviously, it's mind over matter. What we think about ourselves is what we project into the world, and we create more of. And for the longest time, I was creating one problem after the other because I shamefully thought of myself as not good enough and unable to handle alcohol like everyone else. I went through periods where I did manage to quit drinking for 10 months at a time, here and there. And they were the happiest times of my life, the happiest times. But the root problem had not been dealt with. And that was, I hated myself. I didn't want to face myself. I was taught to stay positive. That whole self-development industry, I went right into it. I learned affirmations. I learned what you think about grows. I learned, what I'm feeling is what I'm creating. I learned, and this is all true, but there's a whole piece missing there that I didn't get until my late 30s. And that is facing the shadow, looking within, shedding light on those covert programs that are operating and directing you, your thoughts, words, and deeds in each moment. Okay, so it was fine that I could use willpower and manage to not drink for 10 months, but ultimately the root cause was that I was not filling that void with something else, the only option, which is love. I did not hold space for myself. I did not sit in stillness because I didn't want anything to come up that was ugly that I would have to see. It was not an easy journey to let go of alcohol in my life. It was my hardest struggle today, up to today. It was the biggest mountain that I had to climb and conquer. But I did it. And I am proud of myself. But I recognize that force, that power, that released me from the illusion of not loving myself is universal. It's not the Melise program. It's not Melise. I had to tap in and access source power. I had to finally admit I couldn't do it on my own, as the AAs would say. And I had to surrender all of my small self efforts, all of the self discipline, all of the willpower, all of the positive affirmations and the I can do it and one more day. I had to surrender all of that and admit none of that worked, not on its own. I had to become vulnerable and open my heart. And that required painful exposure to those traumas and wounds that were still suppressed within me. And so it was not an easy journey to finally face these demons. It was a journey that involved a lot of ebbs and flows, very painful. The whole process of going through a deep, deep release of a repressed shadow and then finding a new normal for a little while. And then another shadow would come up and dealing with that instead of running away from it, being with that, being with the inner child that needed to be seen and heard in that experience. So all of those intense emotions that came up when I used to drink, like sadness and despair or anger and rage, had to be dealt with consciously. I had to deal with these consciously. I had to be with them. I had to be with them for as long as they needed to be fully felt, validated, acknowledged, and released in love, without fixing it, without trying to strategize and escape it, without trying to block it. However long it took, and it usually didn't take as long as I would ever think it would. For 20, 30 years of repressing these emotions, it's a walk in the park in terms of time when you finally decide to face them. It's quick. So if you are someone who is struggling with alcohol, just know that only you can be your hero here. No external method or person is your hero or savior. Only you. But it needs to matter more than those other things that you might be putting in front of it. It needs to be your highest value or priority in your life. The need to love yourself, to really love yourself with deep respect, warts and all, in order for you to be able to let go of this habit of drinking. It has to be about seeing every part of you that you haven't allowed yourself to see and being with that. And it can get ugly, but it's worth it. No, it's not easy. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not easy. But it's far better than living a life unconsciously in cycles of pain and suffering. And I know what they feel like with alcohol. It only gets worse the longer you put this off. As the years go by and you continue to drink, even if it might not be on a daily basis. For me, it was never a daily basis. Alcohol wasn't, because of my huge obsession with my weight for so long, I couldn't drink every day. I counted calories. So that was never played into it. And that has nothing to do with whether you drink every day or not. It's whether you use it as a medicine to feel better. We need to stop giving our power away to external forces like alcohol. It's not until you realize and see that you've been giving your power away that you'll be able to consciously change that. At first, you have to acknowledge that. That medicine that you're seeking to feel better about you will only ever come from within you. Now, I believe what helped me personally the most was learning to surrender. And I'm not just talking about I give up. That's a different concept. I'm talking about recognizing that source is here to help you. The divine spirit that is who you really are, the essence of love, the pure loving awareness, not the brain, not the body, not the personality or the self-identity or the name. None of that is really you. You are pure loving awareness, having a human experience. You need to recognize that so that you can access your true birthright, your power, intuition, wisdom, guidance, intelligence in each step forward. You can't do that when you are busy, when you are distracted, when you are afraid to be still because you don't want to face yourself, when you judge yourself as bad. You can't do that when you are unconscious or inebriated or escaping yourself through external forces. You cannot access your divine birthright, spirit, when you're doing any of those things. So that's the first step. Acknowledging that you, the personality, absolutely can't do this. And it's not for you to do either. You, the personality, created the problem in the first place through programming. So you are not the personality. Surrendering that entire idea or illusion is the first step to receiving the strength, wisdom, guidance, and intuition to let go of alcohol. And that involves being with you. Once you're able to surrender, you are able to be still. What happens when we're still? We start to be able to listen to ourselves better. We start to be able to feel the bubbling up of emotions that we've repressed and held down for so long. That rage, that anger, that despair and sadness will start to bubble up when you are still. Let it come up. This is the only way to release it. This is shadow work. This is looking and acknowledging and seeing your inner child that's been screaming for your attention. You are supported and held by spirit because you are a divine child having a human experience. But not until you become still, you surrender and you stop trying to fix or change the program, but instead be with the emotions that you've repressed and held down for so long. Not until you've done all those steps can you truly start to feel that you have your own inner love and inner power again. You are whole again. We don't use alcohol as medicine when we are whole. We don't use anything outside of ourselves as medicine because we know they're illusions. So I want to encourage you, if you are struggling, follow those steps I mentioned. Reach out to someone who does deal with shadow work and inner child work. Start to look into meditation, which is really learning to be still and learning to surrender. These, I believe, are the essential elements that helped me let go of that entire system of treating myself to feel better with alcohol. Now, I could talk a lot more about my journey with alcohol, but I'm going to leave it with those final thoughts because I feel that they are integral. It's not really about me. It's about the knowledge that I want to pass on, that I learned. I don't need to tell you what a struggle it is to be in that cycle of drinking, but I can tell you there is a way out. So I'd encourage you to seek it. I hope this has been helpful for you. Please like, share, subscribe, and contact me if you need personal coaching or counseling with this issue. I'd love to help. Have a beautiful day. See ya.